Hello, everyone. This is Eric Pennington, and welcome to the Spirit of EQ podcast. We're glad that you've tuned in. A few things we wanted to tell you at the beginning of the show, and that's this podcast was created to be a tool to help you, primarily to discover and grow your EQ. Science and our own lived experiences confirm that the better we are at managing our emotions, the better we're going to be at making decisions, which leads to a better life. And that's something we all want. We're glad that you've taken out the time today to listen and hope that something that you hear will lead to a breakthrough. Hey, one last thing. We'd really appreciate a review on whichever platform you use to listen. And if you want to, leave some comments about what you heard today, as well as follow and subscribe. That way you won't miss a single episode as we continue this journey. And with that, the show begins. Joining me today on the Spirit of EQ podcast is Jim Vaive. Jim is the co-founder of Spirit of EQ. He's a spiritual director. He holds a PCC from the International Coaching Federation. He's a friend, and I'm so happy that he's joined us today. Hi, Jim. Welcome to the podcast again.
Thank you, Eric. I'm glad to be here, and that was quite a mouthful that you had.
And I did it pretty well. I usually butcher it. So, I'm thinking I'm getting better as we go along here. And as the audience realizes, Jim, you've been on the podcast before. I think the last two times Lynette was with you, and we were talking about spiritual emotional intelligence. However, today, and we talked about this a couple of times offline, I really wanted to dig into some of your past. And audience, I'm not going into his past to analyze him and to determine whether or not something happened in childhood. And did you fall? Did you eat paint chips or something? I'm just curious about. It's kind of your. In some ways, it's kind of your metamorphosis, because the Jim Vaive that I've known, which has been about 6-7 years or so.
Oh yeah, at
least, right? But there was a different Jim Vaive in a world that you ran, because you had multiple entrepreneur ventures and you were very successful at that. But I wanted to use today as an opportunity to kind of understand about what that life was like, and then maybe your journey to some of the things that you're doing today. So with that, Jim, the one venture that sort of has always been center of mind with me, because when I first met you, I think you were coming toward the end of your time with Varmint Guard, which, and if I can get this right, and you're going to be all over it because of your background, basically it was extermination services or pest control. Is that, am I getting it close?
It was that, and we did everything that had to do with things that could invade your home.
So regardless of the type of
animals, snakes, termites, pests, birds, we did it all.
Did it all. Okay. And when did that come? When did you start that company?
1982.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
You weren't even born then, were you?
Oh, I wish I could say that. But I would be lying. Founded in 1982. Was it just you starting out, or did you have other partners, or how was it?
It's a very complicated question. As in any venture, I think that an entrepreneur starts, you go into it with a certain set of expectations, and those expectations are not always met. Meaning, you might have some partners, business partners, and they don't stay for one reason or another. So the people that I started with did not stay.
Okay, got it. That makes total sense.
And as we went along down the path, we ended up with other business partners.
Okay. All right. So you started off working primarily just in, was it Central Ohio? Was that kind of the...
Oh, yeah. We started in Central Ohio. And we had this idea. Actually, Mike Moore, who was my co-founder, had the idea. I did not. His
Okay.
idea, his idea was called Varmint Guard, and we would go into people's homes. And this was before anybody else in the country was doing it. And we
Okay.
would, from a commercial standpoint, take the animals out of the home
Yep.
and release them out in the wild,
Gotcha.
which I love animals. So for me, that was a really good thing to do. I didn't want to trap them and kill them
Right.
and those kinds of things. So we started this and we talked to the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, and they told us we were crazy. Nobody had ever done that before.
Hmm.
And we just did our usual sales job. And the gentleman that was with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources at the time gave us a statewide license, which was unheard of, to drop wild animals. And we were only operating in Columbus. Little
Okay.
did we know how important that statewide license was going to be down the road.
Interesting. Wow. So that kind of helped the business, right? Because you had the ability to, I mean, you were quote legal, right? And all of that good stuff. And they were allowing you to do this work. What kind of reception did you get from the marketplace?
Well, that's interesting. It was wildly sort of successful. Without getting into a lot of the details, when the first year that we were in business, we started with very undercapitalized. I'm going to say this very honestly. A lot of entrepreneurs are undercapitalized. Some of them have ways of getting money that I did not.
Yeah.
And we started with $25 and a 65 Chevy pickup truck from a dead stop.
Oh,
And
wow.
we went out and worked very hard
Mhm.
and put in, as all entrepreneurs know, very long days, 7 days a week for 2 years. Mike and I didn't get paid for 2 years. We put all the money back into the business. And the first year in 1983, which was our first partial year, we made $93,000.
Wow. Now, in my head, that sounds really good because I'm taking dollars back to 1983, right?
The equivalent's 200 and something now.
Okay.
And we didn't have any capital. So all of that was made from scratch.
Yeah. Pure start.
The second year we did 183,000. And we just kept growing like that until I sold it.
Okay. And because obviously our episode today is not to get into too much of the weeds of Varmint Guard, because I want to segue here in a minute to the most curious part for me when we were talking. But you went from being in that central Ohio to how many? You were in multiple states at the time that you sold the company, right?
Yes, from a pest control standpoint, we had companies like Pepsi and IKEA and things like that. And we did pest control in probably 8 or 9 states.
Okay.
And we did bird control in almost all the states. And we even went down to Puerto Rico to do some bird work.
Wow. Wow. That's a
And
lot.
some big, very big buildings.
Wow. So obviously, Jim, as the company grew, it wasn't just you and partners. There were employees and
Lots of employees.
yeah, and in your role as partner, and I remember you telling me some of those situations, like I think any business partners have, the give and the take and all that good stuff. But overall, how would you say, I mean, what was your motivations when this thing started rolling? What was motivating you? What were some of the things that you kind of said, okay, yeah, I'm going to do more because I want X, or how did that play out for you?
Well, so parts of this story I'm going to be very embarrassed to talk about.
Well, and Jim, if you remember, because we've been talking about this for a while, I wanted to be very sensitive to you being willing to be embarrassed and to be vulnerable. So thank you.
Well, I mean, we're talking about emotional intelligence, and I think it's important to be vulnerable in those ways. I mean, I'm not going to give gory details, but I think overall, I think it's very important. Let me also say very, very clearly that all of the business partners and all of the employees, in one way or another, helped the success of the company.
Yeah, I believe that.
we all had different functions and different things that we did for the company. Mine was to drive the company, and that's what I'm going to focus on with our conversation today.
Yeah.
When I started off, I wanted to be a multimillionaire.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to be able to have the luxury of not having to worry about money.
Mm-hmm.
And I was relentless to the point of a dictator kind of behavior in pushing certain agendas.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll get to this other point down the road. One of the main things that I wanted to do, though, at the same time, so I had this war going on in my head or even in my soul.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to help people out that were the least, the last, and the lost.
Mm-hmm.
So we very early on started hiring people that other people did not find hireable. So we hired at times prostitutes and heroin addicts and worked with them to get them clean. And we have a lot of success stories.
Mm-hmm.
I hired ex-offenders, not the kind that would be a problem for people, but the kind that were not given a chance.
Right.
We hired people that didn't look like me.
Mm-hmm.
And we did that intentionally. Um, did it always work out the way it needed to? No. We hired people that had different orientations than us. And this was back in the 80s.
Yeah, I was going to say that very much on the quote, I guess if I could say it, the vanguard, right?
Yeah, and we hired vets. And we hired people that didn't talk like us and didn't expect them to do that. None of the people we hired did we expect them to act like us.
So if I can kind of pause there, I'm curious. What was the motivation, the intentionality about that? Because that's very intentional, right? I mean, you don't just say, "Oh, look, we've got people here that don't look like us. Isn't that cool?" I mean, where did that come from?
Well, can I segue back to something?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I grew up in Detroit, and we lived in a little Polish neighborhood, and I knew that my future was set with the Ford Motor Company. I was going to be working in the assembly line. I was going to have a track house. I was going to get married to a little Polish woman, and we were going to have kids and a dog and a cat and drink Stroh's beer and watch hockey. All right. On Saturday afternoon. Okay? And then have cookouts at other times. Well, my parents in 1961 went down to Cobo Hall, which was downtown.
Right.
And they watched this guy. They were 2 rows back, and they watched this guy that started off by saying, "I have a dream."
Wow.
Yes, and that guy changed my life along with everybody else's in the fact that my parents decided in almost 2 months to just move to the inner city of Detroit.
Wow.
So I am not like Eminem, who's a poser, who lived up on 8 Mile Road. My parents actually literally did move us to the inner city of Detroit. And I was one of the few white people that lived in the area.
Yeah.
And this was during the racial 60s.
Yep.
And there was marches and protests and all kinds of things. And I lived through what it meant to see that strife, that growth that people were looking for, the recognition that hey, I'm human kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was embedded in me.
Okay. Yeah. To me, that explains a lot. Absolutely.
And I was involved in protest marches, and the hippie movement and all of that stuff. And it was very important.
Yeah. Wow. So, okay, thank you for that, because that does give some context to the intentionality of those decisions you made at Varmint Guard and hiring. And so let me let you pick back up. So what were some of the motivations going on?
Well, I mean, here's the problem. I wasn't a sole owner.
Mm-hmm.
And in the way we structured our ownership is we all had the same amount. And I was the guy that founded it.
Yeah.
And we all structured it. All of us had the same amount of ownership. And we all got paid exactly the same amount of money, the owners.
Mm-hmm.
We never fought about money, ever. Not once in the 30 plus years that we were all together. Everybody was taken care of equally or not, depending on what happened.
Right.
What I didn't say and how I was talking about it is think about having other owners, and they have a right to have a voice.
Yeah.
That didn't think like I did. They didn't grow up in the racial 60s in Detroit. Very few people did. Or in Selma, Alabama, or
Right.
somewhere else like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they had different opinions about the way business should be run. They wanted to run business like a business. I did not.
Wow.
Even back then.
How did you handle that sort of the difference in view?
Well, this is where I'm embarrassed to talk about that. And I am embarrassed. And I'm also sad. For those out in the audience that know what the Enneagram is, I am an 8 on the Enneagram, and an 8 on the Enneagram is a challenger, and one that expresses anger outwardly. And I am a pure 8 when it comes to being a challenger. And there was nothing that would stand in my way ever about anything. And yes, I know that business is supposed to be business.
Right.
I know that we're trying to treat people with respect, especially in today's world. And what I did then would not fly in today's world, because I just forced it by sheer force of will to go in the direction I wanted it to.
You know, I just have images in my head of very volatile meetings and interactions and things like that.
Well, that would be an understatement.
Yeah.
We had good things that happened. You know, we celebrated when successes came in. We didn't have those, awesome profit years where we would have a 15% profit and everybody got a huge dividend and everybody else got paid this, and this. It was, there was times where we didn't make a profit because of my initiatives.
Mm.
And I actually hurt all of my partners.
So that's a point where I remember a conversation with you, and this really struck me. You had mentioned that that when the company sold, you ultimately, it was as if they vanished. You just didn't talk to them again, all of that kind of thing. And you didn't say it to me in a way like, wow, they were so pissed at me, they said they never wanted to talk to me thing. But I think, and Jim, this was just my impression. I think it appeared to me like it was your stating that because of the all the volatility over the years that it was sort of like there really, I mean, there really wasn't anything there to hold on to and to keep going in a relationship. Am I close, or I could be wrong, but that was what
Oh, I think you said it very well,
yeah.
because I think I'm pretty good at what I do nowadays. Uh, from being a spiritual director and a coach, and I've helped some people out that I have as clients in some of the ways, but I didn't know then what I know now,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I hurt those people.
Yeah.
Some ways I created PTSD, and I as an example, our entomologist was a PhD, and he was very gentle. He walked gently through the world.
Mm-hmm.
And he really didn't want to be in business, but he was a partner. And his name was Jerry. And by the way, Jerry, I'm sorry if you should happen to hear this, but I tried to put a round peg in a square hole. And I actually did get the round peg in a square hole.
Going back to that force of will, that
Yes,
kind of thing.
he did it. He did what he needed to.
Mm-hmm.
Got to a point where he was just done. I,
Yeah.
at the end, when it was time for us and we were older and things were changing, he just wanted out. So he did some things that I just were not fair to him,
Mm-hmm.
to get out, just to be done.
Be done. Wow. Um, so as you obviously have had the opportunity, because you've been somewhat removed from that experience, from your sale of the company, that's been some years now, right?
Yeah, so about, I don't know, 5.
Okay. Okay. And when you look back, obviously you're not the same guy. And I've always marveled from somewhat afar, even though I know our relationship is uh, intimate, in that I know a lot and I see a lot and I interact a lot. But there is a part of me that I've kind of taken a step back, and I'm watching Jim and this transformation, because the things that you've mentioned about how you treated people at Varmint Guard, um, that's not the Jim I know, right? And I get it. And for our audience, we probably all could say, but yeah, if you would have known me back X number of years, you would say, wow, you're not the same person. I understand that, because I know my corporate life, there was a different mindset, right? Um, so Jim, was there a catalyst point where you said it's time to change, or did you do it in a sort of a process, meaning I'm gradually?
Okay, so it's a good question. I think that the best way to say it is that I was working mostly externally, and
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't working internally. So my daughter was born, my last daughter was born when I was 30, and I had what Christians might call a conversion experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I started devouring literature, and at the same time, I was going to uh, retreats and centering prayer stuff, and I searched out gurus and priests and speakers like Deepak Chopra and Matthew Fox. I went and met with them, and you know had the money, I could do that.
Yeah.
But and I started trying to figure out why I was angry.
Mm.
Yeah,
Would you
why did I treat people like crap?
Right. So would you say that it's centered? You had kind of narrowed it down to anger is a source of what ails you.
Well, anger is basically telling you that something's blocked.
Mm.
And I didn't know what was blocked.
Yeah.
And it was fueling me. And I was using Varmint Guard as an excuse to put into effect, if you will, my way of interacting with the world. And we had hundreds of employees going through the company and working for the company, and on and on and on. And most of them thought I was crazy because I started doing personality assessments years and years ago before people even knew what they were.
Mm-hmm.
And got certified in DISC and Myers-Briggs and all kinds of instruments. And everybody's going, wow, you're really different. And they have no idea how different I was, because I had two different parts of my personality fighting with each other.
Right. Right. Yeah.
All the time. I was not integrated.
That's a key one. And I certainly want you to store that in your recesses, because I want to come back to that idea of integrated. So I'm curious, how did your partners view some of these things, these micro changes, and maybe to a certain degree, major changes? Did they roll their eyes, or did they?
I don't think after I ended up damaging them
Mm-hmm.
one way or the other, I don't know that they really cared about me to the point where my changes would have affected them for the better.
Yeah. Did that bother you?
And I did it to myself, by the way.
Right. Did that bother you though?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I became more and more isolated.
I guess when I say it that way, or ask it, I think about someone who realizes, wow, I'm going to live differently. I'm going to treat people differently. We do sometimes have this expectation that the world is going to applaud us and tap us on the back and say, or how wonderful, we're so glad we've waited so long. But sometimes people just, like you said, it's kind of, they don't really care. They
didn't really care, but see, they also needed who I was.
Oh, you mean the version?
The version here's what I mean by that.
Mm-hmm.
2008, most of us know the housing bubble burst.
Yep.
And we had a whole bunch of residential customers, a whole bunch of commercial customers. And in 3 months, we lost 70% of our residential customers.
Yeah.
That was a lot of money.
Yeah.
Every month that wasn't coming in. And the phone was not ringing like it had been ringing, obviously, because everybody was freaking out.
Yeah.
Well, that's when my kind of personality steps in and does a good job.
Right, because you're the challenger, the driver, going to get it done. Nothing's going to stop me.
Yes, and what ended up happening was I stood in front of all the employees. I took responsibility, did not put it on the other partners, and I said, we're going to keep everybody employed, but you're not going to have any benefits, but you will get your pay. And when this crisis is over, we'll go back to where we were, or maybe even better. And I looked at the owners and I said, we're not going to get paid at all. So we didn't get paid for a couple of years.
Wow.
And I had to work with the banks almost every week because, banks we had a huge line of credit. And Eric, being your past corporate life, in the banking world, when they put you in workout, it's not a fun experience.
It's not like going to gym for a trek on the treadmill.
No, they do workout because they don't know that you're going to be able to pay back the money.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so they wanted to know what our plan was every week.
Wow.
And we did that for a few years. We got out of it. Our
Yeah.
business regained at what it had lost. The employees got their benefits back, and we got started getting paid. But it took a toll on me.
Yeah. So, just to, and I know I kind of led us off on a little different track there, but you mentioned about this anger thing and and the idea of anger is typically communicating that there's something blocking you. What did you come to determine was blocking you?
Um, so going back to Detroit,
Mm-hmm.
I was one of the first people in the country that was diagnosed with dyslexia,
Mm-hmm.
and I had ADHD. So together,
Yeah.
and people didn't know what that was. Some people thought I was mentally deficient,
Yep.
literally.
Mm-hmm.
And some people didn't know what to do with me. Some people thought I was weird. I am weird, but they thought I was weirder than I actually am. And they didn't treat me well because of that. And I was discounted. I was not looked at as a human being for a lot of my life. And when people devalued me, I was enraged. And so when I was devalued because people thought I couldn't do the job, which I could, by the way,
Right.
I was enraged. And
Wow.
so what was blocking me was having a normal life, was having a life that I was valued for contributing.
Wow. That's powerful. So, when you discovered that, realizing that with your personality and all the neural pathways that were built up until that time, um, what did you do next?
Well, you're it's not as easy as snapping your fingers.
I'm glad to hear you say that because you're right. If
Well,
only you were, right?
yeah, and I went to get spiritual direction training. I went through spiritual formation training. I became a lay leader in the West Ohio Conference of the Methodist Church, lay leader of several churches, because I always said, I can do that. And I would go in there and I would climb to the top of the ladder. And for me, what I was looking for was acceptance. I was looking for, good job, Jim.
Yeah.
And when I got up to the top of the ladder in these organizations, and I won't name the organizations, and I was in multinational organizations at the top of the ladder, it was leaning up against nothing.
Isn't that I mean, that's such a blend, Jim, of the profound and the futile, right? I mean, I think about in my own life, just as an example, I spent so much time trying to outrun my dad and to try to like, I'm going to achieve and I'm going to prove to him and and I remember in the moment when I thought that I had finally done it, I was totally alone. There was no, you did it, Eric. Awesome. You outran him. You showed him. I was utterly alone. And it was kind of like, okay, where's all the value that I thought would be in me getting here? You know? And I'm not saying that I expected that was what you felt, but it just, when you told me about the pursuit of what you were talking about, it just reminds us of how easy it is for us to take events and situations and relationships, and they fuel us to things, you know. I don't know if that makes sense.
Most people find out, and believe me, I know this because I'm coaching a lot of people, different kinds of people, different parts of the world. Most people find out that the ladder they're climbing, when they get to the top of it, they sacrifice far more than they thought they were going to.
Yeah, I would agree.
And it's not leaning against anything. It's just waving up in the air up there. And they don't get the recognition that they expect unless they steal it or take it. And even if they do get a recognition, it lasts for a day. And then what was it that what we were trying to do? Proving to all these people, nah, it didn't turn out the way I thought it was going to. Let me go back to my father.
Yeah.
My father was a guy that was an intellectual and an artist. And because I had dyslexia, I couldn't read real well.
Right.
Because I transposed numbers. I mean, words and numbers and stuff like that. And I did not learn the way that they teach you in school to read. Dyslexia in school did not mix.
Right.
So my father would sit me down in his studio at night on a little gray stool that was about this tall. And he'd ask me to read to him out of a Doc Savage book, a Hardy Boys book, a Nancy Drew book, and read for 2 to 3 hours a night. And I read through the whole series of Doc Savage and the Hardy Boys, and there was a lot of them.
Yeah.
And then I started reading fantasy and science fiction. I started reading Isaac Asimov and Robert Heinlein and, Vonnegut and all those people. And my father did the best he could for me. And what he did for me was to give me a gift because I can read anything now.
Wow. So he was open to that you were going to have to learn in a different way. He saw that.
Well, he was doing everything he could to figure out what to do.
Oh, okay.
And then, in addition to that, he focused me on doing different kinds of things, to keep me busy, to keep my head engaged. Because the way my brain thought, he would ask me a question and by the time I got around to answering it, I was 15 thoughts down the road. And so he thought I was lying because the answer I gave was to the 15th thought down the road.
Yeah.
And nobody really understood how my brain was wired, including me.
Yeah.
But he did me a favor, although it was brutal.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Absolutely. I can understand that from afar. So, we talk about the pursuits and the ladders sort of leaning up to nothing. It's just kind of wavering in the wind, if you will. So how did you have, I'm thinking about the idea about moving forward and moving backward. You're on the verge of leaving or selling Varmint Guard and that kind of thing. What was moving you forward from there? What were some of the things you were thinking about doing next?
So let me backtrack.
Yeah.
One of the things that was the impetus for me was in 1 year, I lost my health because I had a major heart attack.
Okay.
I was getting divorced. I was going to lose my house that I was in, and a bunch of other things all in 1 year.
That's a lot.
Yes. And nobody is without blame when it comes to getting a divorce.
Yeah.
Everybody in the relationship contributes to that one way or another.
Yeah.
So I'm not blaming it all on my ex-wife or anything else. And one of my partners, who was more business minded than the other ones,
Mm-hmm.
did not like working with me, did not want to work with me, did not like my style of management, was not strong enough to fight against me, but was working very hard to get me out of there.
Wow.
So he knew a lot of people in the industry because he was a legacy child.
Mm-hmm.
And he kept bringing people to us that would buy our business, and some of these were some big people. I mean, really, the smaller people could not have bought us. We were too big.
Mm-hmm.
And so, he'd bring work and didn't like who they were, didn't know how they were going to treat people. Brought Terminex, didn't like them, didn't like how they were going to treat people. Brought the largest company in the world, Rent-A-Kill, and they definitely weren't going to treat us the way we wanted to be treated. And then he brought a woman from Minnesota whose name is Stacy, and she runs a company called Plunkett's, who is just a really delightful woman.
Mm-hmm.
She has a mindset for taking care of people. And I thought, that makes lots of sense to me because I was tired. I was tired of being who I was. I was not happy with myself. I was having a crisis of meaning.
Yeah.
And I needed to make sure that the people that I started with were taken care of so I could not feel bad about doing what I was doing, which was leaving.
Mm.
And, Eric, after I sold it, I haven't been back.
Was that a clean break idea?
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't like they didn't invite me back. I went back once for a retirement for somebody.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, I have not been back and I don't need to go back.
Yeah. And I think that's a healthy way of sort of leaving something behind, right?
Yeah. And I wanted to do coaching full time. And, Lynette and I took a job with an international nonprofit that does emotional intelligence training. So we train people all over the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And we rolled right up to the CEO of the company out in California, and we were responsible for all of North America, and that was a good gig. It taught me a lot.
I get a sense too, Jim, that learning for you is a very powerful motivator.
Well, I haven't stopped. I'm enrolled in classes that are going to take me through the next 4 years, and I'm 71 and I'll be 75 when I finish those. And I got some ideas for after that.
And that doesn't surprise me, knowing you. I got to ask, when you think about the changes that you made, I've said this to you before, just in private, that, some people, when they get to a certain place in life, making significant changes becomes really, really difficult. And I don't want to say this to say that, wow, Jim, you are the unicorn and you're one out of 50 million or whatever. But when you recognize some of these things, for example, anger, what was blocking you? What was the root of that? Did you have any times where you thought, I don't know if I need to do, maybe I won't, maybe you compromised? Did that ever cross your mind of maybe not going all the way in?
No.
I was going to say, as I asked that question, I got to remember you're an all in kind of guy. So,
Well, it's like, beef tongue sandwich. I've never eaten it before. I'll take two.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't mean that to say, well, I'm special, because frankly, I don't know that it is special. Frankly, I think it created lots of stress for me.
Yeah.
I
Certainly.
mean, I don't have a problem changing. It doesn't mean that I don't feel sadness or grief or, other things, but it doesn't stop me from moving forward.
Yeah. And to that idea of moving forward, someone in our audience might be, you know, much younger than you and I, who are of the mind that, uh, wow, you're kind of describing how I approach things, or you're describing kind of what I'm pursuing, or maybe even I'm on that ladder and I feel it's just kind of waving. I thought it was against something that I wanted. Um, let's talk a little bit about what you've learned as it relates to maybe helping others who may be walking in the same on the same street that you did as it relates to this business, the business pursuits. What advice would you give? What are some things that you that
I
were,
actually I can say it fairly quickly.
take your time?
Um, I've read hundreds of books,
Mm-hmm.
maybe even thousands. I won't go that far, but I had a whole bunch in my house when I sold them. Um, I've read them. I've written papers on them. I'm doing spiritual direction with the Hayden Institute right now because I'm refreshing myself on what I might have forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
Doing Jungian psychology and writing spiritual papers and psychology papers and everything else. I've sat at the feet of masters across the world, taking classes from them, taking training from them, gone to them, spent time with them, spent time in a monastery for 3 months, on and 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 on. And I don't say that because I'm special. I say that because I was driven to find out why.
Mm-hmm.
And after all of that, Eric, I came back to some very simple thoughts. And I believe it with all of my heart. Everybody is doing the best they can with what they know. And it's our job to be kind. And love holds all of that together. And that's the very simple truth of it from all of that study.
Wow. That's powerful.
And the other truth is nobody knows what the best they can is for somebody else.
Ooh, yeah. Yeah, boy. That's a big one.
Well, my best that I can is not your best that you can.
Yeah.
And we just think that, we should impose our best that we can, and everybody should live up to that level of understanding. Because if I believe it, why don't you believe it?
Mm-hmm. Does that go the same? If I know it, then you should know it too, right?
Correct.
You mentioned that part about the knowing. I sometimes think we have this. It's almost sometimes, and it's masked with all of the wonderful, flowery statements. Our desire to see people grow, our desire to people to come to a greater understanding of X, Y, and Z. And the reality is, those aren't things that you can just flip a switch with, right?
You have to want to make a transition in your own journey.
Yeah.
You have to, and I had the benefit of doing intense work for many, many, many years. I am the product of a lot of training
Mm-hmm.
and looking at myself fearlessly.
Right.
And it wasn't easy.
So what,
Most people give up.
yeah, because that takes me to a point, and I don't want to, for our audience, I don't want to minimize what you said, as it relates to it's hard work, it's tough. There's no getting around that. If somebody, and maybe it's somebody that you're coaching or have coached, Jim, that has said, I don't know if I can commit to what you did, but I want to change. I want to make a transition. How do you, in light of those truths that you mentioned, how do you approach them and from that perspective? And again, remembering they have hired you to coach them. You are somebody they're looking to for help.
I think, Eric, it's immoral of us to have any expectations that people are going to behave like we want them to.
Yeah.
I mean, it's immoral.
Yeah.
And I think that when somebody hires you to coach them or to do spiritual direction or to do whatever,
Mm-hmm.
it's your job to listen and ask questions and let them find the wisdom that is inside of them already.
Yeah.
We don't have a right to make people act like us.
Yeah. And that's really kind of foolish in many ways, isn't it? Because I'm not you. I'm not, our DNA is different. I mean, all these different things that make me unique to you and to every other human being on the planet.
We went out to eat recently, you and I.
Yeah. Right.
And did we order the same thing?
No.
And why do you think that is?
Because you had a specific thing in your head of what you wanted, whether that was from a taste perspective, a size of a portion, what you had already eaten that day. And this just makes me think, Jim, as you ask that question, and I want you to answer, but it's dawning on me. I'm going, what if I was expecting you to order what I order, not knowing what your experience was earlier in the day? I mean, the size of the portion you want. It's insanity to do that to another human being, right?
And yet,
right. And yet, happens all the time.
think what would happen if we would stop rushing by people, which, by the way, a lot of us do,
Right.
and be kind and notice that somebody else is got something going on that they just need maybe somebody to stop, say a kind word.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't do that. I was ruthless. And I don't say that as a badge of honor. I ended up along with the other people that put the time in, so it wasn't just me.
Yeah.
But I ended up with a very large company. Okay, great.
Yeah. It's so fascinating to me. And because I'm thinking back to a conversation I had with a gentleman who was he was an auditor, an internal auditor at the bank that I worked for. And we kind of became quasi friends. And when I left, he was someone that I didn't talk to him regularly, but We would exchange emails, and sometimes we'd get coffee. And I remember one coffee, and this was probably, I'd been gone for a couple of years. And I remember sitting there with him saying, I feel so much freer now because I feel like I can be me. And he gives me this look, Jim, kind of like cocks his head a bit. And I go, well, I mean, I gave some Oscar worthy performances in that world, but it wasn't me. And it was as if he had heard me say that Elvis was walking through the door. And he said, that's really strange, because I really thought you meant all of that. I thought that was really like, you were that driven, you were that focused. And it wasn't that he was saying it to say, oh, you're a fake. It was just his perception was kind of rooted in this person that I didn't want to be. I portrayed him, but it wasn't who I wanted to be.
So maybe I can sum it up like this for us. Mm-hmm. And then we can put our conversation to bed.
I sense a poetic stroke here. Go ahead.
Well, think about it from a car perspective. Mm-hmm. And think about who's in the driver's seat. So imagine that your ego is in the driver's seat, and the part of your ego that's driving is the shadow. And the spirit, your essence, what makes you you, is over in the passenger seat going, hey, Eric, I know how to get to where we're going. Let me drive. And the ego's shadow says, nope, I got it. I'm going to be able to do this. You just sit there and be quiet. And that's what was going on with me in Varmint Guard. The ego's shadow was driving, and the spirit didn't have a voice. And I was driven. And what's happened to me now is the spirit is in the driver's seat. And the ego's in the passenger seat because we need our ego.
Yeah.
And the shadow's in the back seat trying to do backseat driving, and we keep saying, shut up.
And Jim, and just for my own personal, as I look back a bit and kind of put together what we've talked about today, I'm going, as it should be, as it should be. So, Jim, thank you so much for joining us. I call this a very special episode because I know we'd been talking about it, and I said, it'd be a great idea. And then we talked some more, and your willingness to come on and be vulnerable like this with your past is it's an honor. So thank you so much.
And thank you for letting me share that. And if anybody in your audience, or in our audience, I should say, wants to talk about this, and I'm not even talking about making money off of you. I'm talking about if you want to talk, I'm open to that.
Well, we'll make sure to have your contact information in the show notes along with other details, but we appreciate it, Jim. For our audience, thank you so much again for tuning in, and we look forward to the next time we're together. Take care.
Hi, everyone. This is Eric again. A couple of things as we've ended the show. We hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully, you're tuning in on a regular basis. We'd love it if you would give us a great review on whatever platform you're listening to the podcast. It's so appreciative and helps us as we try to get more exposure for the work we do and the episodes that we publish. And we're grateful to you as a listener. The second thing is, just remember, our content is for educational purposes only. It's not intended by any stretch to diagnose or to treat anything that may be occurring in your life or anyone else's life that you may be connected to through the podcast. But once again, we appreciate you tuning in to the shows. And as always, we look forward to the next time that we're together. Take care.